Hi everybody, and welcome back for another episode of Human Trafficking Hater. On this episode, we're going to look at a common way that many people end up being trafficked. No, it's not kidnapping, and it doesn't even involve force. It's the little talked about and even less understood grooming process. I'm going to give you the definition of grooming, explain how it works, and detail the 6 steps that are involved with this coercion-based tactic that is used by many traffickers around the world. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more episodes like it, make sure you click the subscribe button because there are new episodes every week and you don't want to miss them. Now, on with the episode. In Hollywood movies and mainstream media, human trafficking is depicted as a crime that is initiated by stealing a person away with force and usually resembles a kidnapping or abduction. That can and does happen, but not nearly as much as these sources depict. The legal definition of human trafficking requires an action, a means, and a purpose. The means of trafficking includes force, fraud, and coercion. According to the nonprofit Polaris, the main way sex trafficking victims are trafficked is through coercion. Additionally, the average age of entry into sex trafficking is just 17 years old. So, with these 2 facts, we can see that kids are being targeted by sex traffickers and they are not commonly being forced into human trafficking. So how are so many ending up as modern-day slaves without being forced? The answer is grooming. Let me be clear that I'm not suggesting that all individuals involved in the commercial sex industry are sex trafficking victims, but many are. It only becomes trafficking if someone is forced, frauded, or coerced into commercial sex. Grooming falls into the coercion category and is definitely a means of trafficking. The purpose of grooming is for a trafficker to be able to gain full control over their victim and manipulate them into cooperating in their own exploitation. This process takes place over time and involves 6 steps. Because this is a process, many people confuse victims as willing participants, but these people have literally had their vulnerabilities exploited and are no less victims than someone who was kidnapped or abducted into trafficking. The first step to grooming someone is targeting a victim. Traffickers are aware of what vulnerabilities to look for in a person so that through the grooming process, they can appear to help address these needs. Vulnerabilities include being isolated, depressed, hungry, too young to understand what's happening, and other unmet needs. Beyond knowing what to look for in potential victims, traffickers know where to find vulnerable people. They visit and revisit bus stations, shopping malls, shelters, and online forums where kids are commonly not being supervised by an adult. These include Snapchat, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and online games like Fortnite, Minecraft, and Roblox, to name a few. After a victim has been targeted, the trafficker moves to step 2, which is gaining trust. In this step, the trafficker will have several to a dozen conversations with the victim, where they form a bond over common interest or pretend to care about what they have experienced. By being good listeners who appear to genuinely care, the traffickers are able to gain important information that they can use against the victims later. Now that the trafficker has established trust and knows what vulnerabilities the individual is experiencing, it is time for step 3, meeting the needs. Depending on the victim, these needs will range from physical needs like shelter and food to emotional needs like love, affection, or a sense of belonging. By fulfilling these needs, the trafficker gains power. The power is in the ability to threaten to take away what the person thinks they have gained. Having power over the victim's needs is only part of what the trafficker needs to control them. In step 4, the trafficker isolates the victim so they can put themselves at the center of the victim's lives to create a near total dependency on the trafficker. To do this, they distance their victims from anyone who might weaken their influence or contradict the messaging that they're providing. They might make offhanded comments about how they don't like their friends or make it so they become increasingly reliant on them by driving them to school or work and being there to pick them up. By isolating the victims, traffickers make it more difficult for them to reach out to others for help later. At this point in the process, the victim has been conditioned enough that the trafficker can begin the 5th step of exploitation. The way traffickers begin the process of exploiting the victims isn't always transparent. They may start slowly by pushing their victim to do things they might be uncomfortable with, like asking them to have sex with a friend or arranging a date for them as a way to make some quick money. Over time, the victim may be conditioned to believe that what they're being asked to do is normal. The victim may be so attached to the trafficker at this point that they feel like they owe their trafficker for all they have done for them, or believe the trafficker when they say the situation is just temporary. Unfortunately, this is a lie, and the trafficker will use this person as much as possible for their own needs and never have a shred of remorse for what they did. In the sixth and final step, the trafficker maintains control. After traffickers establish control over their victims, they have to carefully craft strategies to maintain it. These strategies differ depending on the person or the situation. And in many cases, the trafficker will continue to use coercion as physical force is not necessary to maintain control over many victims. The trafficker may keep their victim in the trafficking situation by continuing to isolate them, threatening them or their loved ones if they attempt to leave, controlling them through their addiction, or even manipulating their sense of self. For some victims, the illusion of love is enough to keep a person in a trafficking situation. So that's the grooming process, and it is used a lot more than many people think. A majority of identified victims in the United States were trafficked using coercion, and many were groomed as traffickers identified their vulnerabilities, isolated victims, and then exploited victims after gaining their trust. If you want to help keep yourself and your family safe from being groomed, I highly recommend checking out the Polaris website and reading some of the victim stories they have and additional information about grooming. I will leave a link to Polaris' survivor stories and grooming process below. That's all for this week's episode. If you want to see more content like this, make sure you click the subscribe button now, because there are new episodes every week and you don't want to miss them. Thanks for watching.